Hello, I'm John Fenn, the head of research and programs at the American Folklife Center in the Library of Congress. And I'm here with the members of Istinawet Live, who just brought us some heterophonic mayhem from the archive to the stage at the Whitall Pavilion. I want to thank you all for such a great performance and educational opportunity for us.
Thank you.
So we have Ann Rasmussen, Jared Holton, Albert Aga, and Annalise Thomas. Now you know their names. I want to hear where each of you are based, and then we'll talk a little bit about the origins of the ensemble and the project you're doing.
I am a professor of music and ethnomusicology and also on the faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, right down the road. And I also direct the William and Mary Middle Eastern Music Ensemble, which I founded in 1994.
I'm running.
Ya Salem. I teach at the University of Georgia, assistant professor in musicology and ethnomusicology. And so I'm further down the road a little bit. And I also direct a Middle East ensemble at UGA, and we just had our second year together. So we started last year.
Congratulations.
I'm about a 15-hour flight from here at American University of Sharjah. I'm assistant professor there, assistant professor of music, and I teach the Arabic music ensemble there. I began in 2020. And I've been there since then, yeah.
And I teach at Sweetbriar College in Central Virginia. We are a small women's college just north of Lynchburg. And I also direct an ensemble, which I've done for 10 years at Virginia Tech. And
so that's important to note that each of you are ensemble directors, and you don't live in the same town, and you're rarely in the same room. So this is a unique opportunity. I was able to see you perform a version of this program at the Society for Ethnomusicology meetings up in Ottawa, which was phenomenal as well. Let's talk a little bit about the project, what you're trying to do with the ensemble, and then maybe we'll dig into some of the materials.
Yeah. Well, actually, we're all connected in other ways. I mean, for example, Annalise is a graduate of William and Mary. She was a charter member of the ensemble that I direct, so we really go back to day one when we did something informally, I think, and then students said, no, you really have to do this. Okay. So just, to tell the world where this music situates, a non-Western, global ensemble back in the day, nobody knew what to do with that. So I just taught it as an overload for 20 semesters. And now it's part of my load, and it's legitimate, right? But it's still, we're over here, and band orchestra choir is over there. But Annalise can tell you about her research with university-based Arabic and Middle Eastern music ensembles. Albert and I actually met at the Arabic Music Retreat, and we first performed together. I think you were
1999?
1999, so I don't even want...
I was 17.
You were 17, so I was younger too.
I
was younger too. But we met, and we performed for the open mic, right? So I've known about Albert for quite a long time, and then he can tell you also about his research where we overlap.
Yeah.
Jared and I are part of the same silsila, or the same lineage. We've never really collaborated together, but he did his PhD work with Scott Marcus, who's a close colleague of mine, and we are both students of Ali Jihad Rassi, A.J. Rassi, who is like one of really the grandfather of the Arabic music ensemble phenomenon in the United States. When I started thinking about this project, and in the concert, you probably heard that I was invited to this other conference. They said, do something on access to archives. I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. And then I started thinking about my own materials, what I had collected, and the fact that people were already picking and choosing things off my PowerPoint slides and things off a record that I did with Rounder Records. So then, since I kind of hang out up here every now and again, I'd been really fascinated with the archive challenge since you did it with the Lomax recordings, which of course, who doesn't have some connection to those recordings from the songs that their dad sang them in the car or whatever. So I pitched it to Jared at this conference of the International Council for Traditional Music in Lisbon. And in fact, your colleagues, Jennifer Cutting and Steve Winnick, were also there talking about the Archive Challenge. And I said, Jared, you're co-chair of the Society for Arab Music Research Group. What do you think about this idea, and what do you think about bringing in, some other colleagues? So he just you know,
Yeah, we
took
jumped
the
at it.
bait. He took
Yes.
the bait, and we also learned about the Harvard archive, where they had done a nice blog post about Free Copyright Day, which was 1923. 2023 was the day that everything 100 years earlier was released from copyright. So all of a sudden they could digitize and make available all this stuff. I knew about what was in Boston, because that was the site of my early field work back, for my DIS work long ago. So anyway, so we jumped on that collection just because it was kind of available and they were trying to get it out there. So yeah, so we are all connected, if not physically.
Through the research, through the performance traditions, through the practices, which I think is also like part of the dynamic of the ensemble too. Right? So you pull this ensemble together. What's the materials you started? I mean, the collection at Harvard. What did you start pulling on to get the repertoire?
It was, well, part of it, like we said in our concert, was actually just like, what can we listen to and what can we decipher?
So access, one
Yeah,
level of access.
Yeah, and but then even some that really caught our attention had a lot of, static, or it had some really difficult noise to it to like make out what they were singing about or what the melodies were, what the rhythms were, but they were still like really enjoyable to listen to, and there seemed to be like a real scene behind the record, behind the recording. Which we started to explore more and more as we got into it, sort of hearing all these nuances, that I didn't initially hear when we first started this project 2 years ago, but then just all of the listenings, starting to, I think that oud player is following the violin in this like particular way, and sort of naughty. Perhaps, or you're like, or you hear people that perhaps spectators that are there that are participants but not playing instruments, and so they're expressing themselves, enjoying the music. You hear some of that, and then what Anne was saying in the concerts, just how performance practice can be quite different on these recordings, not like how it's practiced today, and so drawing on that, and I think that was a really interesting part of the process, but one that didn't initially hit us at the front, didn't hit me at the front. It was sort of, 2 years, and it was just yesterday in our rehearsals.
When the
realization.
We started to feel like we're sounding like the guys on the record.
Yeah.
After our rehearsal, I was like, guys, we're starting to sound like these guys. We've been just so immersed in this kind of sound that our playing just intuitively started beginning to sound with this heterophonic mayhem way of playing. And it just comes together in a really magical way. I mean, it's very loose, relaxed playing, but it requires a certain degree of knowledge of the maqam and the performance practice to be able to be this comfortable with, playing together.
And the records as touch points, so you start to, you're learning from them, then you start to listen to them and start to embody them. You also ended up doing a lot of discographic kind of research to learn where these recordings were coming from. Like they're mostly commercial recordings that you were drawing on in the initial repertoire. What were some things about that discographic research and learning who the audiences were, where the labels were based, where these records were popular?
Yeah. Well, I'll jump on that. One of the things that was cool to me when I did my dissertation research, and a bunch of stuff on the Arab American community, and that's not my only research life, so it's kind of like me coming back to this in an exciting way, and it's exciting that all these old scratchy records that I listened to before are now interesting to other people, other colleagues, and they want to play them, is that there were numerous local record labels. So there's Columbia, there's Victor. It's interesting to hear about where they were in the world, who they were recording. But also just these local labels are like this person, Alexander Malouf, who, now I didn't talk about this in the concert, but not only did he have a record label, or I guess he was the agent for Gennett Records, okay. But then he also published several books of piano music, so translating these doolabs, which D-O-O-L-A-B, really funny translations, but also like Song of Fatima and Oriental Winds and these really whimsical Oriental pieces for piano. I think he also did some piano rolls. So he was really like a music entrepreneur. His early recordings have like English horn and clarinet and cymbals and all kinds of crazy stuff. So The little bios and the histories are amazing. And that's where some of these other researchers really come in, you know, that you can go to DAHR, you know what that is, the discography of American Historic Recordings. And you can find out, oh, that recording was made, they made 9 more records on October 17th, you know, 1927. It's so cool to think about those histories.
And I think that's an important point too, Anne, is that there's the 4 of you who comprise the ensemble and the project right now, but there's so many people you've turned to, whether it's for help with lyrics, understanding dialect, even understanding the lyrics, and learning more about the songs too, right? So this is a bigger project. It's a huge collaborative project.
Tell about with your students.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really been crowdsourced in a lot of ways, and a lot of the people that we named from the stage, but also just in my ensemble, I have a lot of students that come from different places in the Arab world, and I brought this music to them, and like one of the songs, Ya Nayna Helwa, one of my students was like, oh yeah, I know that song from somewhere, and her mom was there at the rehearsal at the same time, and she was like, yes, you know, we used to listen to this, and another person in the ensemble was from Tunisia, and 2 people in the ensemble from Tunisia. They brought in a lot of the detail. They actually, one of the Bulbul Naga, which we've all known for years and years, and there's this line that, you know, oh, the anemones is how it was translated. But this is a flower. And so one of my students pulled up on her phone like the actual species of flower and showed it all to us. And so just all of these details that come in, they just round out the picture in these beautiful ways.
And those students are often in the ensemble for a couple years, right? So I'm guessing they're probably helping with the newer members too, kind of bring them into the performance traditions, but also some of that personal and cultural connection to the materials.
There's a lot of difference in each ensemble. So for instance, at William and Mary, it's a lot of undergraduate students, great musicians who come and have this option to join the ensemble, and a lot of them do. And she has a number of students with cultural ties. But at Virginia Tech, we end up with a lot of graduate students who have come from Arab countries. They're there to study computer science, to study engineering. They've never had the chance to sit down and learn music. So they come to my ensemble in Blacksburg, Virginia, and we explore the music. And it's great to get their voices to talk about the meanings of a lot of this music in their families and their communities, and just to concentrate on this like somewhat old music in contrast to what's played on the radio all the time and the pop songs that people know, but they know this other stuff too. So I don't know.
So Albert, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your theory, which is not a theory, I think it's a truth, about the United States being kind of a preserve, as in a forest preserve, for what we think about as tarab repertoire. I mean, I use this term marginal preservation, where, you know, things are preserved in the margins while, you know, the home country marches on into the future. You don't have big orchestras here, so you have this little tacht, this small ensemble aesthetic that's preserved here long afterwards, and some other things like that too. But, you know, we're all obsessed with questions about authenticity, right? And we always assume that, you know, immigrant cultures are diluted and they lose their language and they don't, you know, the real thing is over there. But Albert, tell us about your line and your experience.
Especially after moving to the UAE in 2020, I started seeing that more, and, you know, people would come up to me after a performance and say, how do you know this song, for example? You lived in the US most of your life, you know. I moved there when I was 14. But like Anne said, we have this community of performers that met through Simon Shaheen's Arabic music retreat, and then the other ensembles like the Harvard Middle Eastern Ensemble, and Berkeley has an Arabic ensemble, and William and Mary, and, you know, these ensembles created these scenes of classical, academic kind of oriented Arabic music, and it seems like the diaspora was a place where this music was preserved, and people in, you know, maybe in the Arab world moved on from this. This is kind of like the old time music. Like, how do you guys perform this still over there? So, and after moving there, it's like I really noticed that people would be really surprised that we still do this music here. And from the pieces we worked on, like Al-Hilwa Di and Al-Bilbul Nagh, the last two, one of the audience members just came and said, I really love this rendition. And these are very popular songs, Al-Hilwa Di. I mean, so, you know, we did versions that people really don't know of popular songs that people, you know. So the U.S. is really interesting, and I'm not sure, you know, you went to Europe recently. I don't know if that's the case across other diasporas, but it seems like there's a preserve of classical Arab repertoire and an appreciation among the local culture, like American culture, appreciating this music. And to me, that's rewarding as an Arab American, seeing that and seeing people go to these classically oriented concerts and appreciating the music. You know, to me, I feel like that's a rewarding thing to see.
One of the interesting things about that idea of the preserve, and I want to get you each to talk about this a little bit, was the way the records, the commercial records that you're drawing on largely, preserved interesting elements or technologically driven versions of the songs, right? Because there were 3.5 minutes on our side or something like that.
Yeah.
To condense a whole you know, a whole thing into that is a challenge. So what are some of the standout either observations or support for your theory? And again, you told some great stories about some of the pieces on stage. What are some things that stand out about that, about how the records feature as old, right? Oh, we don't listen to that record anymore, but also they're preserving in.
Yeah, well, this was one of the challenges, was performing this and sort of like, well, are we going to be, like, whose authenticity are we going to follow here?
Yeah.
Sort of performance practice as it's taken today, you know, among this group or that group, or like what we're finding on these records, if it sort of busts some of those things. Al-Hilwa Di, I think, is a good example of taking the old and new and finding something really different. The melody is different, of course, but it was also the words, you know, as I explained in the concert. The second and the third verses were different on this record. Everybody could sing along the refrain in the first verse, and you know, that was a good reason to make that record, right? It would sell. People knew Al-Hilwa Di, and they didn't have to put that label on. They put the rooster, you know.
Yeah.
That's would sell it. All of those things would sell it. You know, it was a best-selling song of those years, actually, when it came out. But
It's amazing that the title was The
yes,
Rooster.
right,
With
the Crows.
one
The
line.
title,
Yeah.
yeah.
But then the fact that they, on the flip side, the B side, you know, they talked about, you know, they gave some sort of commentary within this old, it wasn't an old song, it was a new, you know, popular song at the time, but within a known song, they were able to like refashion it, innovate, you know, put themselves in that in a new context, and then press it, and then sell it, you know, and then finding that and trying to decipher the words, and actually we're performing it. We did a third verse that we did not perform, mostly because we just simply cannot get maybe 50 or 60% of the words there. But it's like the idea, we still put it out there. You know, even some of the words in the second verse we still couldn't get. But I think you made some up for today.
Yeah.
They were
We plugged in one word that we couldn't
Right.
decipher, and we said, okay, it must mean this. You know, I could.
Using contextual clues. Right?
Yeah.
Well, clues,
But-
because
Yeah.
some
but
of the places were just really distorted out. We just could not.
But this idea of sort of leaning into the performance itself, the creativity that are there embedded and even archived in the recording itself, the creativity is there. It's not, it's a static object, but it's something we can lean into in the time and think about how that had some sort of dynamism. And then like, okay, let's take Al-Hilwa Di, and maybe for the third verse in my ensemble next year, like we're going to create our own lyrics for that verse. You know, sort of leaning into that as a creative moment that archives can open that up for us, these creative possibilities.
I think sometimes when you listen to old records, you assume, oh, it's, you know, it's old, scratchy, it's hard, you know, primitive, you know, again, major hot word in our worlds, right? And that things evolve, that their, you know, performance practice evolves, right, and so forth. But to say, oh, wow, look what they're doing. We don't do that anymore. What a shame. Like, we should play more like that. And so some of the things that we discovered certainly are constraints of the 3-minute record, which affects all recording across time, across space, everywhere. And you know, particularly like the, you know, putting the improvisations at the end of a tune because there's more space on the record.
Whereas in the tradition, that would usually introduce.
You usually have a you know, improvisation at the beginning before So certain kinds of performance practice that are really cool that we don't do that, or this kind of heterophony, or figuring out like who's in charge in the room. And also that it's just like not that big of a deal if the oud player keeps messing up. Maybe it's not thought about as messing up.
Right.
Maybe the oud player is just always doing that descending line every time. And yeah, that's, that's a hard sell for young people.
Yeah.
Younger ears. Yeah.
Yeah, so having brought some of this repertoire to my students last semester and asking them to listen in this very close way to a difficult, listen behind the scratches. Like as we tried to play it here, all we could hear was scratches here, but like you have to get your headphones on and spend a few minutes like actually to hear the music. They wouldn't have done that otherwise, except that I asked them to, and we listened in our rehearsal. We sat there and deciphered it together. But to me, what's really fascinating about these recordings is that they really capture that moment of people together. And it just sparks so much in my imagination about who were these people in the room, what were the dynamics, and how what I am doing, how is that relevant to what they were doing? Like I'm trying to copy them. They were playing what they learned, and they were playing their best, and I'm trying to hear through it and hear there's not the resonance that we are used to hearing with our instruments as we play them. There's just these kind of plucky, very
different
percussive.
cues, different
Yeah.
cues, right?
But I have to say, this most recent piece that we added to our repertoire from the Library of Congress collection, the Gilman 77, I mean, that blew my mind to be listening to this recording from 1893, from this event that we've all studied and heard about, and then to see the picture of the kanun player, who was a woman, and think about this Turkish pavilion, what that must have looked like and felt like and smelled like, and as this player was creating these notes, which we could kind of hear far off in the distance.
Yeah.
It's an incredible experience.
And I think that it's come up a little bit, but the dynamism you're talking about, it's important to remember that, and you mentioned this on stage, that the recording sessions were live. So the musicians were all in a room together, playing for 3 to 4 minutes. So yeah, they were getting the resonance of their instruments. There also was that dynamic interplay, right, between the tradition and the commercial technology of the moment. But it was live, and you guys talked about that a lot in the performance session.
And then it's interesting, this is something we didn't talk about, but then what do people do with these records? We highlighted 2 female, performers who were totally, legitimate. I mean, in one, Habiba Msika, very, very famous. The other one, a vanity record, that's interesting. But then what do people do with these records, right? Why are they motivated to make records in the first place? And then what do people do? And I remember interviewing Tony Abdulahad, who also had his own label more in the 40s. And he said, when I was little, I used to stand there and crank the Victrola. And my dad and my uncles, they would all sit around and listen to these records. That was his, and I think I wrote about this, that people, so in the 1980s, I was in my 20s, I was interviewing people who were in their 80s. So they go way back. And in many cases, the way that they presented their worlds to me, their aesthetic worlds, their social worlds, was to say, here's this mixtape of our favorite 78s, or you may borrow our collection of 78s and listen to it to see, the lay of the land, what's popular, what do we have access to, what's being recorded. So that's cool to think about, sort of social use of, of records, and then again, what circulates, the fact that it wasn't like people just immigrated and they were cut off. They knew what was being recorded, over in Cairo or in Beirut or
because the
in
labels
Paris
had
or
this
whatever.
global reach.
Right.
Yeah.
Labels and yeah.
I think that's important. So the project is also kind of a social mixtape.
Yeah.
You have many
Right.
facets of this. But one thing you didn't talk about today, and I want to get into this because this has to do with the ensembles and the students. So you all transcribed a lot of these pieces, and in doing so, arranged them for not just your ensemble, but the ensembles you're working on. Can you talk a little bit about that process? Because, again, I know there's some stories behind that of not just getting the words, but making sure you're putting on the page so that students can use them and maybe other people can use them.
Yeah, I
Talk
mean,
about Juz al-Hammam. I mean, that was challenging. Or the Habiba Masika, where all we got was the chorus.
yeah. So, I mean, like, we're used to using notation. Our students are, you know, they can't do without notation, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them. And in transcribing, you have to make the decisions about how it is supposed to go, right? Like, no matter whether there's like 4 different verses and every verse is just a little bit different, right? And different not just in terms of individual variation, but in terms of the direction that the group takes it, right? Which may be led by one individual. But there's this looseness, and like here we are trying to impose order to this looseness and perform the looseness in a way that's organized enough that we are all doing it. You know, I mean, heterophonic
We know where we
mayhem.
are at some point.
Yeah, heterophonic mayhem is something that we deliberately cultivate. And how do we teach our students to deliberately cultivate that when they're used to sitting in the orchestra and you know,
playing what's on the page.
let's take it from rehearsal letter
when somebody
J,
points at
and
you,
you
yeah.
know, somebody's not doing the staccato, like let's get that straight.
And I feel like the transcription exercise that we got engaged with is a way for us to not just like play exactly what was there, or like it's a way for us to kind of get comfortable with that.
Yeah,
And then we
learn
could-
what it is.
We learn what
Yeah,
it is,
yeah.
and then we can depart it, or we can use it. You know, like we did today. I feel like sometimes we played exactly what was on the page. Other times we knew what was on the page, but we could play around it in a way that was, you know, people can understand that and it sounds good.
Yeah, some of the melodies they're seemingly simplistic. Like when you write, you have to choose whether you want to go really simple, like El Bulbul Naga, da 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 da. There's sort of like a stepwise, you know, 5 or 6 notes, or whether you want to try to put like all of the ornaments you're hearing
All of
on
the
record.
movement to
which
the
player?
next
And
note.
Which
Which
player?
player?
Yeah, and so like, or if you want to teach that,
Yeah.
you know. So I have a lot of Arab collaborators, Tunisian collaborators that, you know, they've really helped me see notation as like an aide-memoire. So just something that helps you remember the song that you knew from your neighbor or from your teacher. You know, so if you happen to forget it, there's this basic melody on a page that can remind you. And then you'll remember the ornaments, you know, you'll remember those scenes that you learned, that song. So that for me is a helpful thing when I approach my students that, yes, are notation, you know, compliant. But you know, just to sort of like, we're going to repeat this 20 times. Yes, we're going to do that, you know, and I want you to play it like 20 different times.
Is it going to be
differently.
exactly 20 though?
Yeah.
It could be 21 sometimes.
Right, yeah, yeah.
And like, so Ya Ghazalen was a song we did, and that was a muwashah that's not in circulation in the groups that we were familiar with. And so that was, you know, I look forward to sort of putting that out there with my ensemble. And again, that's sort of like, we're introducing, it's like, it feels like we're introducing this notation now to a piece that maybe a lot of people don't know about, you know, in some of our areas. So it's like, wow, yeah, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be introducing this notation, but, you know, linking it back to the archive, putting a lot of notes on our transcription about where you can listen to it, you know, and realizing that you should listen to it as you read it.
So they're
Yeah.
very much
And it's like-
annotated.
there's an assemblage of things that go with the notation, not just sort of the piece of paper. So maybe you know that can be a helpful thing to,
Yeah.
the
Right.
piece of paper.
And that adds to the crowdsourcing, because if somebody
Right.
hears it a little differently, then, you know, they can do it a little differently.
A couple other examples are, for example, you know, the tradition of Arab maqam is very much an oral tradition. So it's an interesting challenge for anybody to learn maqam, but it's an interesting challenge for people like Annalise and Jared and I to learn this tradition that some people feel like, oh, it's got to be flowing in your blood, or it doesn't, you know, you're not going to get it, right? And when you can hear, you know, the way people treat maqam, and you realize like, oh, there's that riff. That singer is doing the same thing that I heard, you know, a Quranic reciter do halfway around the world. That is maqam bayati, right? So to see this whole, you know, maqam tradition like live on these records is really interesting. And then also like the placement of the beat. Like nobody writes the rhythm down, right? And these pieces, we cheated a little bit because only one of the recordings actually has, 2 of them have percussion in them. I think percussion was like too difficult to record. But, you know, in one of the pieces that I transcribed, Albert convinced us very certainly that the doom is here. Like really, I should retranscribe it and just put the bar line you
just
know,
have to
2
move
beats
the bar
over.
line a little.
I mean, you know, and I'm not hearing it there at my desk. And then once we're playing it together with Albert singing, it's like, oh, yes, that of course, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Yeah, the percussion wasn't there in the recording for whatever reason. I mean, and so we felt like it would bring the thing together for me to play the rec. I'm not a rec player, but I'm comfortable enough to.
But you know,
to,
you
to
know where it
navigate
goes,
myself
right?
around it. So, and I don't really play and sing often. So this was a pretty cool exercise of playing the rec while singing those pieces.
Nice.
So, yeah.
You did well.
Oh, thank you.
I think, you know, for Albert also, who's just really, you know, has developed or is developed, you know, into this really world-class singer and musician. I mean, he's
It
that
shows.
beautiful oud player and, you know, just warming up on the rec, if that's just, you know, making do, well, good for you.
Thank you.
But also the fact that you can just launch into a moal like that. You can just launch into an improvisation
You know,
to
I
fill
love-
in some space.
I love this
Whereas,
idea.
you know, in other ensembles, it's like, okay, we'll put that there and it'll be like solo by Albert right here. You know, and clearly there it's just like, oh, we've got time.
And
you
I
know,
think backstage I was asking you, like, which ones are the ones I'm singing at
Yeah.
the end, the improvisation in? Is it the first one? You know,
Right, you were
And
ready to do it everywhere.
like anywhere you
yeah,
want. Yeah.
So-
It just fits.
This idea of having the improvisation at the end of a piece was really interesting. We never, you know, we have it in the beginning. It's like, you know, it's the introduction or in the middle.
That's when you really have sultana, right? When you really are like in the
Yeah,
mood once you've
yeah.
been playing, and then it's like,
Exactly,
oh, yeah.
exactly.
Now I'm warmed up.
So all these performance practice styles that we're not really familiar with as Arabic musicians or you know, Arab American musicians, or we don't play these things like in the concerts in this way. The heterophonic mayhem or this looseness, I think, and you know, for ensemble directors, people that are academically oriented, you know, like we gotta do the orchestra thing, measure what's going on in this measure and that measure. It's gonna be like completely 100% perfect. It's you know, they might look at this and say, oh, that's not really the right way to do things. But I think it provides this looseness and sound that I like. It's when it's deliberate like that. Now, it might not have been deliberate at the times these guys were recording.
Yeah.
I don't know the oud
Right.
player going down
Right.
on that run, if he was just
I love
like
how
they-
that's the sticking point. That
Yeah.
Right, I know.
really.
and we
has
never
that.
know. You know, we're trying to figure out these stories. Like, did they meet the oud player that day and give him what the
Well,
song
it begs
was
so
gonna
many
be, or-
questions, right?
so
Yeah,
many-
was
Yeah,
this an
was he just like-
ensemble? That was just a pickup ensemble to
Right.
record for that
Yeah.
session?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that's some of the research questions that continue on,
Right.
right? As you guys dig into.
Oh,
this
and we
project.
love questions like this about, you know, whatever album of our favorite rock band, like who played based on that album and why are they on that studio session?
And you see how relevant that is to this
yeah.
tradition as well, right? It's-
Absolutely.
I'm wondering about, and you've all mentioned students a little bit, and students sort of in the ensembles and them giving feedback like, oh, we know these songs, or you know, our grandparents. And do any of you, or have you heard from students after they've left the ensemble and have continued on to perform, or have that's inspired them to continue on? And I know your ensembles run the longest, so the answer is probably yes. But I'm curious about the other ones too.
Well, she had a student here.
Yeah, I had a couple students here. You know, former students who are now all grown up and flown away. Actually, the person to talk to about that, Annalise has done research among like 25 ensembles in the United States and has anonymized comments, but when the comments came back, she said, could you tell which one were your students? I mean, I've had people fall in love and get married in my ensemble. I mean, they got married afterwards. I've had people who have, you know, sort of married the culture and gone off and dedicated their lives to working and living, you know, overseas. I've had students who then fall in, you know, into the language. I've had many heritage learners, people like Albert, who were not connected to their musical tradition or even very much to their own cultural tradition, who come to college and go like, oh wow, I can be Arab in this context. Or I can be Middle Eastern.
So they
Or I
kind of
can be,
transfer more-
you know, maybe they're even Muslim adjacent. Not that the music that we played was religious at all, but there are many different ways, excuse me, in which students would identify with and feel comfortable, you know, playing in an ensemble like this. So that's, you know, that's interesting. But
Yeah.
Annalise, I know your research is.
I had a student here too. That was fun.
Great.
But yeah, so yes, these really transformative experiences. Like there are I think you summed it up well, but I think that the ensembles do provide a sort of a way in that students don't get other ways necessarily. And I think that, you know, we see now how so many people are just not sure how to talk about this part of the world and the people who are from it, and just don't feel comfortable making any comment because they just don't have experience or know anything and know anybody. I think this is a really unique space for bringing together people who are in the culture, and then like bringing others in and letting them talk about music and talk about culture and talk about, you know, these unique metaphors that show up in Arabic poetry. And now, yeah, that kind of sounds like this thing my uncle used to say, and make these connections and really like ground relationships in these ways.
Yeah. Nice.
You guys hear from students too?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in at the American University of Sharjah, so most of my Arabic music ensemble students are born in the UAE, or, you know, expats or local Emirati students of different traditions and different musical backgrounds from the Arab world. So I've had a couple of those transformative experiences where people, you know, right now they're immersed in this Western paradigm of popular music, and they're listening to American music, and then they come to the Arabic Music Ensemble and study with this guy that's from the US, who's Arab, who's there, he's their director, and they're inspired. They're like, oh, I can reach my culture. Look at this guy, he wasn't even living here, and he can do this, I can do this too. So I've had a lot of students that, you know, got closer. And Sharjah is a great place that is sort of considered like the cultural preserver of Arab heritage in the UAE. So it's a good space to kind of bring the muwashahat and bring the khudu, bring these classical traditions. Most of the students have not been engaged in that type of repertoire from the Arab world. So yeah, I mean, definitely I have engineering students and business students that are doing Arabic music ensemble and singing. They got great voices, and now it's like a family. And so in a sense, I feel like that tradition like was kind of a US thing, like this ensemble college Arabic music ensemble experience. And, you know, over there, it's going to be in the conservatories and in music schools. You know, liberal arts university having an Arabic music ensemble of non-music majors coming in and engaging in that is really a rewarding thing.
Yeah,
So
that's fantastic.
yeah.
That's great. Yeah, the small ensembles like this, you know, they really, they're scaled small, and students sometimes are gravitated towards larger ensembles in our universities, and that's sort of a dynamic that we're always navigating. But you know, whenever we rehearse, I leave the doors open, you know, and people pass by, and I've gotten a lot of members coming in to join because, you know, they play viola for the symphony orchestra, but it's not quite what they're wanting. And then they say, "Can I bring my viola?" Yes, you can bring anything. yes. I had a doctorate student who I said, "I play saxophone." I was like, yes, saxophone. We'll bring it in. And so, you know, we got Alf Layla wa Layla, the Muqaddima, and he's actually changed his whole dissertation project as a performer to talk about his disorientation, the experience of disorientation of being so proficient in these Western genres, Western classical music, and then finding himself just at a loss to know, like, he can't navigate the repertoire. He doesn't know how to even hit some of the notes. He's trying to create different intonations and thinking about his instrument in new ways. He's thinking about rhythm in new ways. He's thinking about melody and feel and mood and scene in different ways. And so it's so integrated for him that he's changed his whole doctoral, you know, study to
That's
think
pretty
about
transformative.
Yeah. So.
It's change your focus, yeah.
And that's a high level, but I mean, there's undergraduate students that aren't music majors that come and that enjoy it, they love it. There's cleaners that
in the
are building
building.
cleaners that walk by and tell me how much they love it, and they come to our concerts.
Yeah.
You know,
Do you guys have other faculty members that
we
come
have
to the
faculty
ensemble?
members, and we have
Faculty
community
members, yeah.
members as well.
Community
You know,
members,
I have a Syrian oud player in my group now, and he is sourcing a qanun from Syria right now. I was talking to him yesterday about what qanun he should buy that he's buying, and he wants to donate to our ensemble.
Wow.
Because it's had such an effect on him and his family. So I mean, there's these small ensembles are small, but I think we all have stories, so many stories like this from a number of different people, not just students, but the surrounding community that find their way into it, and it has a transformative role in the community. Yeah.
Yeah, no question. We make space for these communities and these histories and these stories and the poetry and so forth. One, it's great to have students that come in and they just, they find themselves. And of course, as any ensemble director, you want that person to walk in as a freshman in the fall and walk out as a senior or hang out in town for a couple years beyond, because that's the way, you really cultivate any musical group. But there are some people who also just come in and they're like, they're ready. I'm just thinking like they're ready for the menu and they're gonna get the whole thing right there. And they're like, oh, and I'm ready to play a solo. And you're sort of like, this is a really big tradition. You're not going to just learn it in a semester, right? I mean, I'm studying it all the time. I'm learning all the time, right? So, the people who just kind of like want to dip their toe in and sort of get the whole thing because, it's not orchestra or whatever. You kind of have to, you kind of have that, that orientation to deal with as well. I actually have a question for you.
Shoot.
So we've done this, and we're trying to figure out, should we like publish a book? We don't really have enough for a book. Maybe we could, organize a website of resources that people could go to. But, you and your colleagues who are sitting on this mountain, like the world's mountain of archival materials, what are your suggestions for us in terms of next steps, or what we could do, or what would be ideal?
That's a good question. Keep performing as the ensemble.
Yeah, and
I'm 100% satisfied with the 2 performances I've been able to see. But I do think, I know from the transcriptions and the annotations, like all the deep threads of research, I would say figure out the best way to make that widely available, right? I mean, books are great, but I think web-based resources, I don't know, I can imagine like some sort of, there could be a podcast too, where you guys talk about a piece.
Yeah, a piece, yeah.
And all the different decisions you all had to make as co-arrangers, and that becomes something that then is really accessible to students, but also to community members, to staff, faculty or otherwise at the institutions, because I think, more and more it's like, there is so much, there is a mountain, there's several mountains of stuff. How do you get into it? And I think it's that really fascinating, heterophonic mayhem, curation and performance that you all have provided in this model that provides an access point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love libraries, but I always thought archives were kind of like, that archiving committee of our Society for Ethnomusicology, like kind of dusty people doing dusty things.
There's no dust in the archives,
right?
though. We clean it.
But the archives are exciting, right? And that's something to contribute.
And I think that this kind of project and something like the Archive Challenge and that kind of creative engagement with materials demonstrates both the change in continuity that's in almost every tradition, right?
Yeah,
and things are old, but they're also new every time someone performs it. So I think that's the kind of contribution you all are making here.
And like living it through the performance itself, and kind of verifying that, this is like, does change the way we're playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember how thrilling, when you did this Lomax Archive Challenge, and like I went and I watched the little videos, and then it was like I clicked again, and then there was the field recording.
The collection item. Yeah.
Right, the collection item, and then I clicked again, and it's like there are Lomax's field notes.
Yeah.
Making that kind of
cool.
that kind of connective tissue between the lived experience of performing it and learning it to the what is the source material. I think that's what you guys are poised to do. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you on behalf of everyone who is in this room, will hopefully watch the webcast, for bringing this to us. It was such a great opportunity.
It was standing room only.
I know.
How much money did we make?
Well played. We do everything for free.
That's what one of my guest artists once asked. We had that's one other little thing that we do is all of us, we have a forum into which we can invite other guest artists who can come and experience like, wow, look at these university students. Look what they're doing. They're all ready for me to come and, sit in here. And some know that that's possible, but others are just completely blown away. But I remember I think, Annalise, you were in this concert, and the thing was packed, and we got done, and the singer said, so how much money did we make? I said, Yusuf, the concert was free. I said, free?
It's a public good. You guys
It's
are
a
doing
public good. Music is a public good, so we're glad all this
Well,
material is
thank you for
available.
doing your public good here and for sitting for this interview. It was really lovely.
Thank
to
you
have
very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yes.